Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Afterburner. I'm Bill Whittle. On the night of January 16, 2012, Juan Williams posed the following question to Newt Gingrich.
Speaker Gingrich, you recently said Black Americans should demand jobs, not food stamps. You also said poor kids lack a strong work ethic and proposed having them work as janitors in their schools. Can't you see that this is viewed at a minimum as insulting to all Americans, but particularly to Black Americans?
Now, before Newt even answers, let's just stop right here. First of all, notice that this isn't really a question, it's an accusation. And it's an accusation in line with the liberal narrative that conservatives are racists. That narrative has to be hammered home all the time, because without 80 to 90% of the black vote, Democrats never win another national election, ever. You see, without the race card being played at every opportunity, Black Americans may wake up to the fact that under Barack Obama, black unemployment is at its highest level since the Civil War. Without the constant manufacturing of racism where it doesn't exist, Black Americans may notice that all of the states that are in the most dire economic trouble, places like New York, California, and Illinois, not to mention crime-ridden, bombed-out ghettos like parts of Detroit and Washington and LA, are under Democratic control enforcing liberal policies, and that the people who get hurt the worst in those places are Black Americans themselves. So, you see, the race card has to be played, and so it is. Notice also how Juan Williams uses the incredibly powerful psychological lever called social proof when he says this.
Can't you see that this is viewed at a minimum as insulting to all Americans?
Well, I fall into the set of all Americans, Juan, and I wasn't insulted by it. None of the thousands of people in the room were insulted by it. About 40% of the country self-identifies as conservative. That's twice the number that considers themselves liberal, and they weren't insulted by it. Juan Williams is lying. He's intentionally lying by telling viewers that all Americans are insulted by the idea. That's merely insulting to him. See how it works? Now, let's get to Newt's answer.
No, I don't see that. My daughter, Jackie, who's sitting back there, Jackie Cushman, reminded me that her first job was at First Baptist Church in Carrollton, Georgia, doing janitorial work at 13. And she liked earning the money. She liked learning that if you worked, you got paid. She liked being in charge of her own money, and she thought it was a good start. New York City pays their janitors an absurd amount of money because of the union. You could take one janitor and hire 30-some kids to work in the school for the price of one janitor, and those 30 kids would be a lot less likely to drop out. They would actually have money in their pocket. They'd learn to show up for work. They could do light janitorial duty. They could work in the cafeteria. They could work in the front office. They could work in the library. They'd be getting money, which is a good thing if you're poor. Only the elites despise earning money.
But Governor,
first of all, Williams is trying to gin up outrage by saying that an old white male is racist for saying that young black males should get jobs as janitors. And now we get down to brass tacks here, because that presupposes that conservatives consider janitorial work demeaning and suitable only for racially inferior people. But that's a lie. Like most conservatives, I got my first job doing menial work, and like all conservatives, I have infinitely more respect and admiration for a young black man who gets a job as a janitor than I do for a young white man living on welfare and student loans indefinitely so that he can study Renaissance poetry. I have infinitely more respect for that young black man. When we say people should take janitorial work over food stamps, we say that not because it's just good for black people, it's good for everybody. Look, I started working in the Miami Planetarium at age 13. I took tickets, I showed people to their seats, but what I really did was sweep up the floors and clean up vomit. My first job was as a janitor. I didn't think it was demeaning because I hadn't been taught it was demeaning. Of course, I grew up before the self-esteem movement hit. I was proud of making my own money. I was never told I was far too precious a snowflake to make $2 an hour cleaning up other people's involuntary personal protein spills. Just never occurred to me. That's why I have so little patience with the Occupy Wall Street crybabies. You start cleaning up vomit at $2 an hour, you got nowhere to go but up. It builds a little gratitude into your life. Now, Williams criticized Newt Gingrich for saying black Americans should demand jobs, not food stamps. The only people that disagree with that and demonize the very idea as racist are people that think there's an advantage to be had by having black Americans on food stamps rather than them having their own jobs. People who are dependent on government handouts tend to vote Democrat. People who work for a living and pay taxes to support people that are insulted by the idea of taking menial work over a handout tend to vote Republican, because ultimately, when it's all said and done, that is what all of this race-baiting, poverty pimping, and entitlement worship comes down to. It benefits the Democratic Party, and especially the liberal elites like Juan Williams, to have poor people dependent on them to redistribute other people's wealth in exchange for the votes that give them the raw power to take through legislative force salaries and perks that they could never earn on their own out in the private sector. Here's a universal truth. Whatever we subsidize, we get more of. Progressives subsidize poverty. They pay people to remain poor and dependent because they need the votes of poor and dependent people to steal money from taxpayers whose income streams usually started by doing the menial work those progressives now condemn as racist. They've turned America into a place where it is more noble to take another person's wealth at gunpoint than to start by doing the menial work needed to create your own wealth. And the only way to break that cycle of decline, ruin, envy, dependency, and collapse is to see it for what it is and not be afraid to say so.